Hi, everyone, and welcome back to the Disinfo Detox, where we unpack messages we absorb online and explore how media shapes the way we think, feel, and act in the world. Today's episode's a little different. At Disinfo Detox, we're breaking off and doing some individual interviews. So I'm excited to introduce my first ever solo guest and media literacy scholar and educator, Dr. Allison Butler. Allison is a powerhouse in the field. She's written extensively on media literacy and social justice. She's the Associate Chair of Communications and Senior Lecturer of Communication at UMass. And when I saw this viral TikTok trend using the song Man of the Year, I just knew she would be the perfect person to unpack what's going on. So, welcome, Allison.
Thanks so much, Sydney. I'm super excited to be here.
Yeah, of course. So I just want to give people like the gist of what I sent to you, which was essentially this Instagram post going over the TikTok trend of Man of the Year. And in the trend, it features a bunch of women using the song to essentially share their experiences with infidelity, fat phobia, domestic violence, or even assault. And it's usually used in like a humorous tone on the platform. So one user even described it as a trend for, quote, calling out men's trash behavior. And it's been used in over 100,000 TikTok videos so far. I actually looked this up this morning. I think it's been over 200,000 now. So for me, this raises a lot of questions. Not just about gender dynamics in media, but about humor and about what it means for like personal pain and when it becomes public content. So I just kind of want to ask and like dive in about how you feel on this trend for Man of the Year. Is it powerful? Is it funny? Is it unsettling to you? Why do you think it's just resonating so widely with people?
Yeah, I mean, I'd say to your question about is it powerful, is it funny, is it unsettling? Yes, to all of the above, right? Um, the song Man of the Year by Lorde, it's a haunting song, and it's super minimalist, right? I've listened to the song on repeatedly. I've watched the official video repeatedly. I mean, it is a woman um, in a room with like a dirt floor and a chair, right? There's not a lot of flash to it. I think Lorde comes to us as a pop singer where so much of what we've seen from them in the past is, I think, for pop music, a pretty incisive critique of class
Mm,
and of looks and sort of what's expected. So that Lorde is kind of going into a direction of exploring gender is both not surprising, and I mean that with the utmost respect given
yeah.
some of the stuff that they've tackled in the past, and probably a really great entree for young people who are maybe struggling with their own gender identity, or their own understandings of their sexual identity, all of
Mm,
the above. Um, I think it is also a really clear sign of the fact that as a society, even with all of our quantity of digital media outlets, we don't really have productive places for young people or adults for that matter to pose their questions, their concerns, their fears, their anxieties, their anger. We have a lot of spaces to do that. But what happens when we have a viral response to this song, as you quoted, calling out men's trash behavior? Um,
mhm.
I think it shows specifically for women, although it's probably not exclusively for women, but for the purposes of this right now, specifically that like when women push back, when girls push back, when they try and stand up for themselves, there's a nearly instantaneous backlash. So, how do we maneuver through our technologies? I do think it's probably really valuable that social media is there for young people, again, adults also, to sort of stake these claims. But where do we go from there, right? How do we think about potential systemic or material change based on
Mhm.
that? When we look at history and we look at women pushing back against gender norms or pushing back against gender restrictions, we take maybe a few steps forward. And then there is, as I mentioned, that inevitable backlash. What do we need to do to find a place where we can kind of keep moving forward? It's a
Mhm.
tricky environment. I'm going to sort of reveal my, woman of a certain age here kind of status, which is like, back in my day when I was a teenager and we were
Mhm.
struggling with stuff, we didn't have the sheer quantity of outlet. There's no doubt about it. It would have definitely been harder. It definitely was harder to find spaces for, hey, where do I fit in? How do I belong? How does something like this resonate? Uh, but I don't know that having more quantity translates to greater quality.
Mm. Yeah, absolutely. And I really like what you're saying about needing to navigate these spaces and figuring out how to navigate these spaces or move forward together. I
Hmm.
think about that especially when it comes to social media, just because there is no handbook on social media of how to navigate or how to respond to these practices. And I think that's a huge reason why things like phone bans are so popular, where people are like, I don't know how to handle this, so I'm just going to get rid of it. And I think that the more difficult conversation is to be able to have these critical or a lot of times really controversial topics or conversations online together and like figuring it out together.
Yeah, but we're terrified as a society. We're terrified of difficult conversations. I mean, let's just look at the lack of sex education in our K through 12 schools, right? Like that is a scary topic, right? To talk about that stuff is difficult. So what's an answer to that? Just don't talk about it. Right.
Hmm.
There's definitely a part of me that agrees with like phone bans in school because I know from my own personal anecdotal corollary, not causal evidence, they're distracting, right? They're super distracting. And I know I can go down a rabbit hole and I'm not the target audience, right? So yeah, there's a part of me that's like a super fan, like, yes, let's ban phones in schools. But then there's the other part of me that's like, yeah, but what is that actually teaching us? What are we
Yeah.
teaching our children? We're saying that if something is potentially problematic or has problems with it, we just box it up and compartmentalize it away until the end of the day, right? I mean, and
Mhm.
it harkens back to older arguments when we look at like early concerns about how much television young people were watching. And I
Mm.
always love the language of this. Kids these days, it's always kids these days, they're watching too much TV. And I
Yeah.
guess I'd like to know what's the right amount then? And if you are doing too much of something, is it also possible that you're doing too little of it? Like, could somebody else be
Mhm.
doing too little of it? Right. So, too much is like, it taps into our fears, it taps into our anxieties. I think it can make us feel a little bit more comfortable, like, oh, good, somebody else is scared of this too. I'm not
Mhm.
alone. And yet, too much doesn't provide us with a sort of more comprehensive and complicated understanding. What if we did two things? What if we said, hey, no cell phones during the school day, but we're going to spend some time talking about why we're doing this and
Mm.
what problems we're finding with cell phones? And hey, maybe is there another way around this? Is there a way to think differently about this that acknowledges our phones are part of our worlds right now, right? I've certainly
Mhm.
talked to teachers that have been so frustrated by their students like sneaking cell phones in class and
Yeah.
then have said, but I struggle with it too, right? When we
Mhm.
talk about no cell phones in school, we're pretty much blaming young people for not being able um to sort of manage their impulses. But like neither can we, right? Like neither
Yeah.
can we. So what if we worked on all of that together? What if we said, hey, how can we work as a team, as a community, as a class on this? Maybe
Yeah.
we could come up with something that's going to be more complicated, no doubt, but also more comprehensive and maybe more community based.
Yeah, absolutely. And that's what I'm always hoping for as well, and why I care so much about the media literacy world. I know though you've written a lot about the intersection of media, but also about the feminist movement. And I'm kind of wondering when it comes to this particular trend, do you see it relating to other movements, like, for example, the hashtag Me Too movement?
Sure, sure. I think we can kind of go back in time a little bit. If we think about the start of Me Too, there wasn't a hashtag on it, right? Me Too started by a woman of color named Tarana Burke, who was using it in her work with women and girls who had suffered from some sort of sexual abuse, sexual trauma. It was a shorthand way of being inclusive, right? Me Too.
Mm,
It meant that, at least for a time period until folks maybe felt more comfortable or never got to that point, they didn't have to say anything else, right? There didn't have to be this sort of deep exploration of one's trauma until or if one was ready, right?
mm,
And it was not, there was no such thing when she started, like, when there was no such thing as a hashtag. It wasn't that she didn't make it a hashtag, that there was no such thing as hashtags at that point. So
yeah.
in, during the kind of like Harvey Weinstein of it all, when the conversation was really truly exploding about um, sexual assault, sexual harassment in professional locations, in personal locations, etc. It was the actor Alyssa Milano who built it as a hashtag, right?
Mm,
And she built it for, to my understanding, similar reasons, drawing from Tarana Burke. The idea that you don't have to detail your trauma. Me Too stands in. It says, I know where you're at. I've been there too, right? But what she did was made it a hashtag. And because she probably at the time had a significantly larger platform than Tarana Burke, she, one, gets credited with it, but two, was able to make it go viral in our kind of celebrity fascination, right? But
mm,
do I think Me Too as a movement or Me Too as a hashtag is like perfect? No, of course not. But I don't
mhm,
want to let perfect be the enemy of good, because what
mm,
Me Too, the movement, what Me Too, the hashtag, and then maybe the movement additional to that is, it did give women and girls this platform. It allowed people who didn't want to talk about their trauma to have a way of processing it without having to go into some of the micro details, right? It did provide for a parasocial community, to give women and girls, and by extension, certainly men who might have taken a moment to kind of look at their own behavior. Uh, it provided an opportunity for women and girls to be listened to, right? To be
mm,
heard, to be seen in a way that they might be able to control the narrative. What a brief, tiny narrative. Me Too. I get to be in control of that, right? Did it
mm,
solve any of our all of our problems with sexual assault and sexual harassment? Absolutely not, but it provided a vocabulary, a space, an arena, extend the metaphor however we want here. It invited the rest of us to think differently about our own experiences and maybe our own behaviors. Um,
mm,
I think ultimately it means that uh, when we look at the Sean Combs trial and we see that he was acquitted of the major charges and found guilty on more minor charges, transportation for prostitution versus trafficking, we get a response to that right away, not weeks, not
mm,
months, not years later, right? When we think about, so I'm going to be a little bit all over the place here. I apologize. This is so much of what I'm thinking about these days with a project that I'm working on. But when we think about sort of Anita Hill testifying against Clarence Thomas back in 1991, one, there was no social media. Two, there was not a significant response immediately on a national level, right? There was absolutely press conversation and there was absolutely a response, but it was years before folks looked back at that and said, hey, wait a minute, there might have been something off about how that was managed. When we
mm,
look at the Sean Combs trial, it was instantaneous, right? Instantaneously, there's a national conversation about the treatment of women, in this case, in the music industry, about our understanding of language, about how we do or do not listen to women, the pressures that women are under,
mhm,
especially in power, vast power differentials, and so we're talking about it more. We have a greater vocabulary for it. I do think, I don't like to punish or praise any particular technology, but I do think that is a place where social media can be both punished and praised
mm,
simultaneously, right? It has provided an outlet for these conversations while simultaneously has provided an increased outlet for cruelty, right?
mm,
To your early conversation about the sort of response to the Lord song Man of the Year and this opportunity to kind of call out men's trash behavior. I've been sort of poking around on Instagram looking at it, and there is a response to that of young men calling out women's trash behavior, right? So
Mm.
there's this kind of snowball effect to it.
Yeah.
But if nothing else, we're getting a vocabulary, and we're getting some places where we can kind of anchor a conversation. And that
Mm.
might be what helps us move forward, probably at an incremental pace, but maybe that's what we hold on to.
Yeah, and it is interesting, like in an effort to draw attention to something like, for example, domestic violence or fat phobia or any of these things women are talking about, people get their feelings hurt because they
Hmm.
are being associated with a group of people, that people being men, and they identify with that group of people. And they're saying, well,
Hmm.
I'm not blank, blank, blank. And so people automatically kind of get their feelings hurt. And it is interesting when there are movements like this. And it does make me think what you said about vocabulary too, and how we have a new vocabulary. And one of the things I was thinking about, I was reading an article on The Economist the other day about the word woke and how woke
Hmm.
has turned into this kind of like politically charged word. And I don't know, I wonder like how do you even prevent that? How do you prevent that from happening in a world where things do go viral or they are associated with different, like even different political parties start to
Hmm.
identify with particular words. And I wonder if you can even prevent that from happening.
You know, you've mentioned a little bit, and I know we'll get into a little bit more in a few moments, this idea of humor.
Mm.
And I'm thinking of, this isn't necessarily ha ha laugh out loud funny, but there is a little bit of humor to it. I'm thinking of the book Braiding Sweetgrass.
Oh, I have
And
that on my shelf and have
read it. It's a
for months.
beautifully, beautifully written book. But I think
Okay.
one of the most human funny intersections is she's talking a little bit about, I mean, and this is not a book about the media per se, but she has a brief conversation about Fox News. And imagine if Fox News was really about news about foxes. And it's like, yeah, that sounds great. Like, I'd love to learn more. I mean, it's a really, I think, subtle and important commentary on like what is being told to us is important, right? So
Yeah.
when we think about the word woke, it's like, let's diffuse it and defang it a little bit from its sort of ideological connections that have happened, the way that it's been weaponized by the right, to be this sort of super snotty thing. What
Mm.
if woke just means that's it? We're just awake. So I'm going to I'm going to be woke because that's when I'm going to be able to think about things and
Yeah.
look at things and contemplate stuff and maybe think about what a news program about foxes might be like, right? Like,
Yeah.
I think, I'm gonna kind of quote Nolan here a little bit. So I guess I'm a little bit psyched that he's not here so that I can steal from him without him being here. But one of the things that Nolan talks about a fair amount, and I think he talks about it really well, so I'm totally gonna to steal from him on this, is the right does a tells a bad story well.
Mm.
They can take what is a really bad, think of, the big, beautiful bill and how horrible it is, right? The right can take a bad story and tell it well. They've done that with woke. They've done that with, freedom of speech. They've done it with the First Amendment. They've done it with immigrants. They've done it with the poor. They tell a bad story well. Maybe
Mm.
what the left should do, and I include myself in this sort of shoulda, coulda, woulda, is let's start telling our stories better, right?
Mm.
Let's
Mm.
start telling. We are so on our heels these days and getting kind of pushed around, wildly disorganized, right? Let's start telling our stories better. To be
Yeah.
woke is to be paying attention. To talk
Mm.
about diversity is to expand our worldview. It's to learn more, right? Let's tell that story better. Let's
Yeah.
not let it get co-opted. Let's not let it get owned, right?
Mhm.
I want to be awake. I want to be awake because there's fun things you can do when you're awake. And I can learn about the world when I'm awake. And I can learn about something beyond my tiny existence on this planet. And then I get to be more and I get to do more and I get to know more. How is that
Right.
political? Right?
Yeah.
How is that dangerous?
Yeah,
It's
absolutely.
it's being around. And
Yeah,
then I'm going to go to sleep and I'm going to take a good nap and I'm going to go to bed and all that kind of stuff so that I can wake up and do it again. Let's
yeah,
figure, and I don't know that I'm the person to do it, but I think it's time for I don't know that I have the skill, to be honest with you, but I'll be there to help in whatever way I can. Let's tell our story better.
yeah, absolutely. And I think that is like the difficult part of like social media, or maybe the goal that people are trying to get on social media is like the reason I got into social media and the mental health space in particular is because I believe at the end of the day, like it is a human space and it is like an effort to recognize and try and have the human experience in an online presence. And I think we just don't understand how to do that yet, but that doesn't
Yeah.
mean that we can discover new ways to do it together. And I do think part of that is rewriting stories together.
And we live in this kind of is and ought. This is how it is, but it's not
Mm,
necessarily how it ought to be. This
mm,
is how our media are. Doesn't mean that's how they need to be. We can change them, right?
yeah,
It's going to take a while. It's going to take a lot of work. We as individuals do not have the money that these corporate oligarchs have, right? I mean, the fact that Jeff Bezos can basically rent out a city for his wedding, whoa, right? We don't have
well,
that kind of power by any stretch of the imagination. But I think most people look at that and kind of think that that's tacky. It's
yeah,
insensitive, right? What do we have, right? We have the power of our vote. We have the power of our attention. We have the power of purchasing or not, purchasing financially or purchasing with our time, right? So if we want a different media environment, we can do it. I will not downplay how hard that work is going to be and how much time it's going to take. It's not going to happen overnight, but is and ought. This is how it is. It's not necessarily how it ought to be.
yeah. And I wonder if we can expand a little bit on that question of humor and how it kind of takes role, not only in this particular trend, but just in media literacy education as a whole. Like how does roles and platforms like TikTok play up humor or ask us to be humorous and like reward us with like algorithms boosting like humorous content? Like what do these stories have and what are like their social impact?
Sure. So actually, I think I would start answering that question with going in a completely different direction for a moment and then kind of coming back. I think about like horror movies or roller coasters, right?
Mm,
And I think both of those are things that people either love or they hate, right? But
mm.
a horror movie and a roller coaster can teach us about stuff that maybe we don't want to learn firsthand and can get
Yeah.
us up to that last possible moment, right? Don't stay in the house. Don't look behind you. Keep running, lady. And it's always a lady, right?
Yeah.
Um, or just as the roller coaster is about to crash to the bottom, it goes back up again.
Mm,
Things that scare us. It is hard to practice through things that scare us, right?
yeah.
I don't want to jump off a cliff to know what that feels like. But a
Right.
roller coaster is going to give me some information about what it means to be completely out of control,
Yeah.
and have no power whatsoever, but then work my way back, right? A
Mm,
horror movie could potentially, I think sci-fi falls into this too, but sci-fi tends to potentially be a little bit less scary. It helps us kind of work through unknowns that we might never be able to know. Right.
mhm.
And it gives us an opportunity. Again, we don't have to like it. We don't have to choose those at all. I'm not saying you the only way you're going to learn about what you're scared of is by watching a horror movie. But by watching a horror movie, we might learn about fear, right? And how
Mhm.
we can sort of work through fear and how fear can be diffused. Watch a horror movie with the lights on and the sound off. And
Yeah.
it's just like people looking over their shoulders, right? It diffuses it. So
Yeah.
now to get back to your question is I think humor can diffuse in sort of a different way, right?
Mm,
Humor can take something that is hard to grasp or challenging to talk about, or confusing and sort of lighten it a little bit. Not lighten it in a way that makes it less important, but
mm,
lighten it in a way that kind of provides an entry, right?
mm,
So if I am somebody who, for example, sees or listens to Lord's song Man of the Year and think, okay, fine. This artist is singing about one thing, but my interpretation of it is something different. And my interpretation of it reminds me of a struggle that I had. But I don't want to, I don't, that struggle, I don't want that struggle to keep bringing me down, right? I want to
Mhm.
move through that. I want to move past that. A little lightness, a little humor can help us move past, can help us move through that. And I think I think it is an art, right? Um, we think about sometimes our own behaviors, right? Sometimes when we are in the face of tragedy, we do stuff that's mildly inappropriate, right? Maybe we tell a joke at just the wrong time and it lands wrong, but it's like, oh, I was trying to, bring a little levity to it, right? Or we're
Mm.
at a horrible situation and you just kind of bust out laughing and you're like, why? This is not funny. Why am I laughing? And it's like,
Yeah.
because it's a way to work through it, right?
Yeah.
Am I safe? Do I have a way out of this? Do I have some sort of recourse? Then, yeah, maybe we just spend a moment with the absurdity of it all. So I think
Mm.
humor can invite us in to complexity, to difficult conversations, and help us kind of look at them in a way that can sort of understand them better, right?
Mm. Yeah,
Um,
absolutely.
and I think there are people with an absolute gift for that. I mean, I think about like the comedians, like Tina Fey and Amy Poehler. I think
Mm.
both do a great job with that. They use humor to kind of comment on what it means to be a professional woman in a workforce, right?
Yeah.
Uh, they use humor to kind of comment on the state of women in Hollywood, and it's
Mm.
like there's a truth in that humor. There's a reason why I don't want to be super sad about this because then I probably won't do anything about it. But the humor is going to invite me to go, I can maybe find a way through this.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's making me kind of think about like who we're inviting because when
Hmm.
I see these posts, like obviously, I think most women who have experienced some of this to some extent are already understanding. They are already what I would call like empathetic to women who have gone through these experiences. But I wonder if humor is also paired with like Brene Brown's idea of empathy and like
Hmm.
relating to another person. And that humor is like kind of also like the bridge to empathy and allowing for understanding to come from people who might not be as understanding or who don't
Absolutely.
quite get it. Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, and empathy and sympathy, I think are really, they're tough. They take time,
Mhm.
right?
Yeah. Yeah.
It's a lot of work to be empathetic. It's a lot of work to be sympathetic. It's pretty easy to brush people off,
Yeah.
right? It's pretty
Absolutely.
easy to be like, not my problem,
Yeah.
right? Not my circus, not my monkeys. Uh, Empathy and sympathy take work. They take work for us to be slightly less selfish, right? Less thinking about ourselves. But they also take work to sort of do reflective work on ourselves to say, oh, where do I fit in or not with this, right? And it's, you know, it, we have to practice, we have to work at that, right? We have to work at that. It kind of maybe goes against some of our, I mean, I don't know, but I would imagine that empathy and sympathy sort of go against kind of a survival mechanism, right?
Mm.
Survival doesn't give us time to sit down and think. It
Yeah.
says danger on the horizon, I got to get out of here.
Yeah.
Empathy and sympathy say I got to stick around. This is uncomfortable and scary and maybe a little bit dangerous, but my job is to stick around with this.
Mm.
And how do we do that? How do we learn that? We are not a culture, certainly not a school system
Yeah.
that on a broad scale teaches that. I think there are
Mm.
absolutely examples. And I would imagine members of your audience are the folks that are sitting there going, I do teach empathy. I do teach sympathy. I do
Yeah.
teach connection, 1,000%. But I think on a broad scale in our nation, that's not necessarily something we do. And we certainly live in a political environment right now that
Mm.
rewards cruelty and reactionary, promotes reactionary behavior versus empathy or sympathy.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think like just kind of to wrap all of this up and think about the overarching, like, what do we want out of this? I'm just kind of wondering if you think that like viral trends similar to this could actually shift our cultural understanding of gender and or power.
I mean, I think so.
Yeah.
I think so. Some viral trends, they are like, well, they're like viruses. They crop up, they're a huge thing for a few moments, and then they dissipate, and we tend to forget about them. I mean, do you remember every flu you've ever had? We kind of brush it off to the side. But I guess if I'm going to try and extend that metaphor, the next time we get flu, we remember. We stock up
Mm,
earlier on our medicines. We get the better soups. We line up the streaming for the crappy TV that we're going to watch while we're flat out on the couch, right? So again, it's tiny little things. If it gets cultural attention to something, if it gets us to pay some degree of awareness, maybe that means that we make this tiny shift to our next step or our next
mm,
conversation or the way we listen to somebody or work to hear somebody in the future. I don't think they necessarily solve all of our problems at that moment in time. They're not perfect and flawless, but if they help us take a couple steps forward, if some 12-year-old in the middle of nowhere with not great access to um, say a robust and comprehensive school curriculum on sex education or on empathy or sympathy can get something from a viral TikTok post or a viral Instagram post,
mm,
okay,
mm,
okay, right? I mean, I think about, again, my own adolescence. There was that song, there was that book, there was that movie, whatever, that got me, right? That was that was a game changer,
yeah.
right? That was a game changer. So maybe now it's a TikTok post or an Instagram post.
Mm,
I think, again, technology, I don't want to be fearful or fascinated with it. I think technology giveth and technology taketh away, right? I think social media can do there's such a platform on social media for harm and for cruelty, especially how you can be just anonymous and say terrible, terrible things about other people. And at the same time, a young person in a community with really strong anti-trans laws can maybe use social media to understand their own sexuality and identity development and have a place to go, oh, I'm not invisible. I'm not lesser of a human being.
yeah.
This is a way that I can see myself. I'm all for it.
Yeah. And I think that's a perfect note for us to end on today. Allison, thank you so much for joining us and for just helping us to think more critically and I think also more compassionately about just the media that we consume and create.
Thank you. I'm always happy to be here. You guys are doing a great job.
Hey Detoxers, you've been listening to the Disinfo Detox. If you value smart takes and sharper media literacy, support us at patreon.com/disinfodetox. No cash? No sweat. Just like, comment, follow, and share. Even a one-word reaction boosts the signal. Thank you for supporting the Disinfo Detox, where media literacy meets breaking news.